Hello, I'm Tequila Johnson, and welcome to another episode of Help Me Heal. Listen, today all I can tell you is get ready for this. What do you do when life takes a turn for the worse?
Reality really kicked in that I am completely homeless.
I experienced oral molestation from my mother's husband.
So I was really angry with God. I've been raped as a kid. You made me born deaf.
I went through drugs, prostitution, and I go to this room with this guy and I can hear people in the bathroom. I was tied up. Every orifice of my body was touched.
Mommy's not responsive. She's not breathing. She's cold. I said, call 911. I'm coming home.
Welcome to Help Me Heal. Listen, I'm excited, but my heart is pounding because when I read the profile of our guest today, the beautiful Devika Williams, listen, you guys, all I'm gonna tell you is just get ready. And I wanna thank her for being in the studio with us on today. Thank you for sharing your story, the highs and the lows with Help Me Heal. I want to just dig in at the very beginning because I believe that piece of your life is so vital because that piece kind of builds to the point where you're at now. We know that you are a twin. Mm-hmm. So I want you to tell our viewers just at the very beginning of when you knew that your life at that point started taking some turns and you start experiencing some things that you really probably shouldn't have experienced at such a tender age.
Well, first, again, thank you for having me and thank you for allowing me to share my story. Yes. It's such an intimate and large platform. Well, I think for me, the earliest genesis of my story, I want to say at the age of 5 is when I found my voice.
Right.
And how I found my voice was due to early trauma. My twin sister and I experienced incestuous rape from my uncle, which started at the age of 3. And how the discovery of that was one day, after an incident happened late that night, early that morning, we was getting prepared to take a bath for the evening, and my god sister at the time was 19 years old, and she was attending for us, and then as she was bathing us, she noticed that we had, vaginal bleeding. And it's us in the house, he's the only male in the house. So she asked the question, what happened? It was both of us. So she figured like, what's going on? And herself experienced early sexual violation. She knew.
Right. Let me ask you something. Now, you said at 3, and I know you're an adult now, but do you recall those, that time? Do you recall being raped? I know that was very young, but and sometimes when we're young, we can remember some things, but 3 years old, I mean, you're just freshly out of Pampers.
Thank you.
And just being, potty trained, but to experience, I mean, that's the ultimate. To experience that before your life really began, like 3 years old, where was your mind, as a kid?
The thing, okay, so that wasn't my first childhood memory that I remember. That was for me, my personal trauma, but experiencing my father passing away about 7 to 8 months prior to that was the earliest thing. So I remember very vividly because I experienced that trauma, the whole funeralization of him, then my sister and I having that sexualization. It was awkward. What made me understood that I knew was wrong and really going through the guilt and the shame was going through psychotherapy. The leading up to going to the court case, when as I said I was 5 years old, where I found my voice.
Right.
Having us go to the trauma centers and talk to these different, child psychologists, and they keep making you reenact. Tell us what happened. Use these dolls. So in the reenactment of using the dolls, it traumatized me.
Right.
All the more because I have to tell these adults. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it,
Right.
And I remember when we first went to the trauma center, they asked us, what were you wearing? At 5 years old. And my mom like, what can a 5-year-old wear? And I'm like 5 years old, but I'm like, what does my clothes have to do with anything?
Right.
You know, this is an uncle, this is a family member. Like,
Right.
what does my clothes, and that's something that stuck to me throughout the years. That was the earliest thing that just unnerved me, was every time they asked her, what were you wearing, what were you doing, as if, it made me feel like as if I'm the one that did something wrong. Like I, a 3-year-old, enticed this grown behind man, you know, because
Right,
that was
right.
kind of the messaging early on during that time that I had to work throughout the years.
Right.
Was I did something for this man to do these hurtful things to me.
Now, we know your sister sleeps in peace with God.
Yes, she does.
Did she share those same feelings? Apparently, it was both of you guys that was raped. So how did she cope with that? You know, being the voice for your sister today, how did she cope with that?
That was actually a great question. We did a documentary last year, and it was primarily highlighting women and men's voices who experienced rape. It was during that body of work and hearing my sister tell her story that I, when you were talking about what you remember,
Right.
repressed some stuff.
Okay.
So for me, being the eldest twin, I was always the protector. I had went someplace during some of those acts throughout those 2-year time frame to where I repressed a lot of things. And it was, we were live taping and she said something and it triggered because I was going with her. And I literally had an aha breakdown on the
Right.
camera, and I realized that happened. And it was so hurtful and it was so bad and it was so painful. I understood how my sister, she acted out.
Okay.
My sister was, she battled with depression.
Okay.
That wasn't my thing. I was like always, the glasses always have full, but she had a very negative response.
Okay.
And that kind of guided her energy a lot throughout adolescence and early, you know, preteen years.
So she carried more of the
Oh yeah,
anger.
she did. She cared. We both were angry, but for her, it was like more like, you know, she projected a lot of anger with my mom over different things, over other things that happened later on. So her anger and her rage was definitely projected a lot to my mother.
How many years did you all experience being raped by your uncle? Was it one time? Was it twice? Was it?
It was ongoing. So from the time he moved into our home, I'll per se it was about 2 years, because we started when we was 3 years old. It was discovered when we were 5. And we went to court, our testimony, the rape kits, he was charged and he went to serve prison. And because of our testimony, we had to go on the stand. And he said, like, you lie. He called me a liar. And I was like, I pointed him out. I was like, you did this, you lied. And it was so chilling in the courtroom. Like, you can literally, like, the air went out of the room. Like, when I had to look this man in his face and say, you did this to me.
For a kid that's watching social media right now, because social media is open, it's an open platform. For someone that may have experienced being raped, they're 5, they're 6, they're 7, they're 8, and it's a family member. If you can go back to that stand, what would you tell that 8-year-old right now?
First, I would say it's not your fault. And that what happened to you happened. You are whole, you are wonderful. You're not a bad person. And it happened. Like, that was for me, like, people would try to diminish. You feel like, you know, it's your childhood imagination. You can't make that up.
Right.
That type of violation, you can't make that up. And let you know that your voice does have power, even at 5, 6, and 7, and 8, because it was the power of me telling them that you did this to me is what sent his behind to prison.
All right.
I got him on 16, so he was there like 11 years.
So after he went to prison, how was life then? Was you able to pick up the pieces and start living the life of a normal, you know, kid? You know, what happened after that?
For a short, brief of time, we had a sense of peace.
Okay.
We had that, he's in prison. But let me see, my mother remarried about when we were like 9 years old, 8 going on 9 years old.
Before you answer that, how did that affect the family? When he did go to prison, you know, how did the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, you know?
Our family dynamic is very interesting. We're a very small knit family.
Okay.
But my mother actually had a mental breakdown. That's her first one.
Okay, after
So,
this.
yeah, my mother
Okay.
had a mental breakdown. The hospitalization piece, because our family, we were, like my grandparents and aunts, they were, very much so helpful. So we couldn't really distinguish the big gap of a span of time of her being hospitalized. But my mother went through hospitalization because of it. So we were together, but it was hard for us to be around like my grandfather and my male cousins,
Okay.
who were raised like our brothers, because we literally, our family was like a small nucleus. Once we worked through the trust, good touch, bad touch, boundaries.
Right.
Once we got over the fear of someone hurting us, our normalcy was able to come back within the family.
Okay.
But as far as our home life, things continue. We experienced another victimization.
Okay.
So that childhood, it was rough, because when that seed was sown
Yes.
at 3 to 5, when they kept saying, "What did you do? What were you wearing? How did you act around your uncle?" It gave me this perception that I was the cause of grown
what?
men to defile me.
Right.
And so when I experienced oral molestation from my mother's husband at 9, a few times. My sister did too, but we didn't know it until we got older. That seed was, something about me makes men want to do these things to me.
Right.
And that's something I carried through all the way out to young adulthood.
Wow. Wow. Now, your mother's husband. When you told your mom, this would happen to me, I need you to speak for you and I need you to speak for Demi. How was the reaction? How was your reaction and how was her reaction?
The irony was we didn't tell my mama right off the bat, because after the trauma of everything that happened with the rape kits and everything, we knew that what he did to us, there was no substantial physical evidence. We know that because of the trial and everything.
Okay.
So I didn't tell my sister until, I think it was probably like
So
14.
you all didn't tell each other?
We didn't tell each other,
Wow.
because I thought it was in isolation, because he did it in the isolation. See, with my uncle, it was so bad. Like, this man, like, he terrorized us. I know what terrorism feels like. So we would watch and have to do these things in the room. Like, he would make us watch and see. So with him, he isolated us.
Okay.
So I just thought that, it was me that, this man is doing.
Right.
So
you
things like that.
internalized it and she did the same.
So when we found out, not too long after that, my mother and him, it was a short marriage, and I guess it was infidelity. I found out later. I share more about that in my book, how that unraveled. And it wasn't until she got into her other partner that we told her.
Okay.
We were like 14 years old, and my mom lost it.
So from 9 to 14, internalizing the boogeyman coming into the room or into the bathroom. And your twin sister, I mean, I don't have a twin, but I was told that relationship is so close where
It
you
is.
can't even really explain how close they are. I have a sister, but not a twin sister. With you internalizing that, keeping it from your twin and your mom and the world, what did that do to Devika? How did you keep your self-esteem? How did you keep the image of who you are together from 9 to 14? Because still, that's a young age. And you're a young lady dealing with some real difficult things. How did you not lose yourself in that time?
My faith. I accepted Christ at the age of 5. My faith, my prayer life. I learned early on how to mask and how to internalize.
Okay.
So I went within myself. I wore that strong, girl thing. I embodied that very young. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna let this break me, because the way I understood God and my faith, I was always a church baby. And when the Spirit of God, touched me at the age of 5, I went down and said, I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. And it was me trying to get understanding, well, God, why did these bad things happen to me? Why me? It was those type of questionings at a young age that kept me. And I would do this stuff in quiet in church, and I kind of reserved. And then I also turned that energy to being very overachiever academically. So
Okay.
I put all my energy in academics and sports.
Right.
So that's how I channeled it.
Okay.
Just focus, kept myself busy and reading. So that's how my academics was always up to par, because I just immerse myself into that.
Okay. If you're able to think back when you and Demi at 14, after you both have experience, what was your conversation? If you could think back at that conversation that you both had with what you experienced with your mother's husband, what was that conversation like? How did you break it to your twin, and how did she break it to you?
It was in a conversation because my sister and my mom had this womb dynamic since we were young. Being a twin, you know, you have your similarities and differences. My sister always wanted that father touch, so she always felt like the reason why we have my daddy is your fault. So her and my mom was always at odds. So I'll always be triangled in that. So it was literally, my sister was going off on my mama about her common law husband at the time. He was very physically abusive and things. And
you guys witnessed him being physical
to
abusive
us,
to you?
not to my mama.
So he would hit you guys?
Yes.
Did your mom know?
Yes and no. When it started at 14, yes, but when it first started with my sister and my mom, it was just a lot. Because my mom told me my mom had a mental.
Right.
She had a mental breakdown. After that, my mother had not been the same.
So do you guys feel like keeping things from her was maybe a sense of protecting your mom, you know, from her experiencing the mental breakdown the first time? Do you think, well, because sometimes kids internalize things and they see their parents going through certain things and they say, you know what, mom, dad is already going through a lot. I'll just keep this to myself.
It wasn't her. It was more for our self-preservation.
Okay.
Versus my mom. When I was getting older, 14, yes, because of seeing my mother in the medicine, having a catatonic state, like seeing like how physically and everything, her spirit. My mother was the most boldest, jovial, bright-spirited, beautiful woman. We lost her that day when it came out, when the police was at the house.
Okay.
I no longer saw that woman anymore.
So it's almost like you lost mom in a sense, and you lost dad.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So it came out when my sister was confronting my mom and was like, "You don't protect us." You know, it was real. And then she was like, "You so busy worried about him, you don't know what your ex did," and da 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 da. And it was like, huh?
That's how it came out.
That's how it came out. And then it was like, and my sister looked at me and I was like, "That happened to you?" I was like, "I didn't know he did you too." And my mama was like, "What?" And my mother went back in the hospital again.
Wow.
So, not understanding that but my mother was a workaholic, a single mom. She worked hours on end to make sure she had 6 figures, to make sure that we lived a certain lifestyle and we had these different things. So for her, I'm working hard, trying to make sacrifices for my kids.
Right.
And I left my kids exposed to the enemy.
Right.
So, then for my mom to have left him early on because of, she found out adultery, like she didn't stick around, let him, just treat her and stuff like that.
Right.
So
she ended.
So she ended it because we came home, all his stuff was out. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on, So in that relationship, to see my mother do that, that was like the last time we see my mother being strong when it comes to not letting a toxic relationship overcome you or to even entertain a toxic relationship. That was the last time we see my mom really put her foot down.
So going through that, now you're 14, you're in school, and you spoke about getting involved in curricular activities at school. What was your relationship at school during the school time? How did what you went through at home, how did it affect you in the school?
Horrible. Oh my gosh. So with that, academically I was still up to par, straight A student and stuff. Socially, I started hanging around because I was always known as the nerd girl, awkward. I didn't know I was a pretty girl back then because of the violation.
Right.
I just knew that, again, I'll say it like this, I have like this cool personality, but older men I was always attracted to older men, so I really wasn't checking for the boys in middle school. But I started hanging around with other girls who were very much, sexually promiscuous. I felt comfortable around because I understood their struggle,
Right.
And I went through another situation, hanging with the wrong crowd. I was gang raped, set up by girls. And
this was at what age?
That was at 13. So when you said 13, 14, like it was a lot going on. And I stood up for myself. I was like, nah, that's not going down like that. And so I was going through a very notorious gang, batting some of the members that happened. It was real ugly. And I refused. I was like, nope, y'all not gonna. I basically wore the scarlet letter. Like, I was slut shamed, called everything but a child of God. And I was pistol whipped and everything. Like, girls set me up. And when it came out, I was in the principal's office. I fought the girl in the principal's office.
So at that moment, you was almost like, I had enough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, I mentally checked out because I just couldn't understand. I was like, God, why these things? Like, why me? Like, what is it about my body? So then I started thinking, like, my body became like a bad thing. Mm-hmm. You know, up until that point, like I said, I found like commonality with the girls because I understand these sexual urges and desires and stuff. But I shut down. Like, I literally shut down. But because I refused to not be quiet, so many other kids, that's when my platform, right, speaking out for people who were raped, so many of the girls and boys came out, was telling me what's going on at home, right, people that experienced there at the school. And although I wasn't popular, right, I was well respected by so many people. And that's when I realized that I had a passion for advocacy, where my gifting for counseling came out. So I was counseling and mentoring. So although I wasn't accepted in different organizations, I began to create organizations. Right, I began to create my own lane.
Turning that pain to power is what we talk about. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about scleroderma.
Okay.
And when we first had our conversation about it, honestly, I was not aware of that, medical diagnosis. I knew of lupus, and I knew of other, autoimmune diseases, but I did not know about this particular disease. How has your earlier experience affected that particular disorder that you're dealing with? Or is that something, because most people don't really know, is it generic? Is it DNA? Mm-hmm. Is it something you're born with? Is it something you inherit? So for those that don't know about scleroderma, can you break that down for us?
So autoimmune disease is it is a big umbrella in itself, and it's so weird because Demetria, scleroderma, and autoimmune disease, that was her baby. She can spit it out to you medical verbatim, but right, in layman's terms, autoimmune disease, a lot of young women acquire that pretty much during your menstrual, from the time you start menstruating to about your early 50s. Wow. And what can happen, so it is something onset, it could be some type of deficiency, stress. I believe stress and environmental factors are key things when it comes to autoimmune diseases. Okay. And so for Demetria getting it, I definitely know it was a linkage between pregnancy and stress. She was in a toxic relationship. But I believe in my time of prayer and reflection, people could tell you anything, but this was the kicker of our story, which I didn't share. So my uncle who raped us at the age of 3 was HIV positive. And we didn't find out till we were 16. He was HIV positive.
Wow.
Okay?
I'm having a hard time. You know, I have my lashes done.
Listen, I know about the lashes.
I don't want to cry up. Just the mere thought of being exposed. I have nieces. And I have a niece that is 4 years old. Mm-hmm. My heart breaks to even think a baby, because that's baby. Mm-hmm. A baby that young, to go through something that traumatic. It's really the grace of God that you're in your right mind, because most people will probably end up in a mental institution. I mean, just realistically. And when you say that, I can't do nothing but reflect. And I want you guys to 3, and we're talking penetration, 3 years old. It breaks me to hear you say that, even though, and I admire your strength, but still being strong is still something that it's an ongoing healing process. Yes, it is. Because if you dwell on it, it will be inhuman to not really feel all of that again. 3 years old, everybody.
Yeah.
And this is why we have to be so careful on who watch our kids.
Amen. Yes, ma'am.
Who watch our kids?
Family
Who are we're leaving our kids, our minors, in the hands of. So going back, and I'm sorry, I just had to interrupt because you just grabbed me, because I mean, at that age, I can just imagine you screaming for your mom. You're screaming for somebody,
Oh,
and
he
you.
had that gun loaded right there. In the
So
corner.
now you're looking at a
Oh
gun.
yeah, that's how he threatened us. I'll kill all of you if y'all say anything. That's why we didn't say anything.
Oh my God.
So HIV positive, and I remember one day we were sitting in the hospital, and the doctors came in. They was talking autoimmune, and I was sitting there thinking HIV autoimmune immunodeficiency syndrome, and the Spirit spoke to me, and I told Demetria, I said, Demetria, I said, do you think that we had built up antibodies? Because we would be tested negative, and we had it for years. We couldn't understand why we kept being tested and probed, whatever. But they inquired HIV. My uncle and all his brothers and siblings, because they used to do shoot drugs.
Okay.
So all the siblings, all of them died from it at the height of the pandemic. In the 80s, heroin
Right,
and
they
drugs,
did
shooting
heroin,
these in Miami.
right, needles.
So that's how he inquired it. And so the aha moment, I said to Demetria, well, maybe we built them type of antibodies, and now we're dealing with this autoimmune. Because autoimmune could activate just like cancer. So they can't tell you, they can say this hereditary linkage. Some autoimmune things like lupus, once you have it, you want to definitely look at hereditary. But scleroderma is like the cousin to lupus. They mirror each other on the module side, on the scientific side, as you look at it, it's the cells. But for her, I definitely felt, for me, doctors may try to diminish it, but because we were exposed to autoimmunodeficiency syndrome at a young age, I believe that by the grace of God, we did not get HIV, but that autoimmune stuff.
Thank God.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that that's the source
Right.
of what replicated her at the age of 33.
Right. Listen, we're going to continue this story on next week. We will bring Miss Devika back on next week because, listen, we can't get all of this in today. I will close out with saying this on the show. Watch who you leave your kids in the hands of. Let's not be so free. And I know that we're in a time of millennials, and millennials have their own thoughts of how they parent. But listen, these issues are real issues, and we hear them repeatedly. So here, we have 2 twins that were raped at 3 years old. Please tune in next week for the second half of this Help Me Heal show with Ms. Devika Williams.